Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Thank you for dropping by and pressing that click button so you can hear this podcast, Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. I'm your genial host, the legendary DR. With us is Keriann Mcgoogan from Guelph, Ontario today, where it's quite brisk, as we say in Canada. Keriann has a new book out. It's called Sisters of the Jungle. So, Keriann, first of all, thank you for taking some time out of your chilly morning to chat with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I'm looking at the book. It's called The Trailblazing Women Who Shaped the Study of Wild Primates. Sisters of the Jungle is the actual title. Now, is that you on the cover?
That is not me. That's actually one of the sisters. That's Dr. Linda Fettigan, who was pretty much the inspiration for the whole book.
Good. So it's all about primates and people who study primates. So what inspired you, I guess, to get involved in this field, which I understand is mainly, I don't know how else to put it, female-oriented?
Yeah, so what I discovered along my journey is that it is a primarily female-dominated science, which is kind of unusual amongst the sciences and mathematics fields. But yeah, so my path to the primates was definitely not expected, I would say, to say the least. In high school, and I write about this in the opening of the book, but I nearly failed my 11th grade physics class because I had done pretty poorly on a midterm, and I remember very viscerally sitting in the study carrel in the library just with a calculator, trying to figure out what I needed to get on the final exam just so that I would pass. Yeah. And I kind of, in that moment, swore I would never, ever take science again. So pretty, you're 16 years old, so you have these sweeping views on the world. So never would I take science. So I decided I would enroll in university as an English major, assuming that that would do it. Like I wouldn't have to take science. But I learned pretty quickly that even English majors have to take a few credits in the sciences. Just I don't know, something about us being well-rounded individuals or something like that. So I ended up looking at the course catalog to see what I could take, and one of the courses that jumped out at me was something I'd never heard of before. It was Introduction to Biological Anthropology, and it had this one word in it, which was primatology. And when I looked that up, it meant the study of monkeys and apes, and I thought, that's a pretty good, alternative science that I could take. It sounded pretty interesting, so I signed up just as an optional course, and it ended up being taught by one of the most charismatic course instructors that I've ever had. His name was Brian Keating, and at the time he was the head of conservation at the Calgary Zoo. And the university had very wisely brought him on to teach that course because he was so inspiring, I think. They were trying to attract more students, and it worked for me because he taught us all about these amazing primates all over the world, mostly in the tropics, which is nice to think about today because it's so cold here in Guelph. But yeah, more than 500 different primate species, and he brought his, home videos. There's one video I remember really well of him at Jane Goodall's site in Gombe in Africa, and he was being groomed by one of the chimpanzees. And I was watching that video as an undergraduate student, just mouth wide open, totally inspired. And so I ended up switching my major from English to anthropology, and I discovered that there's actually a whole degree that I could take at the University of Calgary, which was a Bachelor of Science in primatology. So somehow it had caught up to me, the sciences.
They caught up to you. And I must correct you, Keriann, please. It's grade 11, not 11th grade.
Oh, sorry about that.
You're
kidding. You're right. It is grade 11.
Just kidding. So you said 500 different primate species? Other than humans, I guess you can't name them all, but I thought it was just apes, baboons, chimpanzees, lemurs, basically. Am I wrong? Monkeys?
No, those are definitely included. So yeah, so there's different groupings. So the apes, there's great apes, which are the ones like gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans are all great apes.
Oh.
And then there's actually lesser apes, which are like smaller bodied, so like gibbons, siamangs would fall into that. And then there's the monkeys. So baboons are a type of monkey, but there's, many, many more. Like I studied howler monkeys in Belize, for instance. There's, mandrills and macaques are all types of monkeys. If you see a primate that has a tail, that's a dead giveaway that it's a monkey. Apes don't have tails. So that's how you know the difference between those two groups. And then, yes, the lemurs are another a grouping as well. So that's what I studied for my PhD. And there's actually over 100 different species of lemur.
Whoa.
So that's that's a fun fact. What many people don't know.
Nope, we do now.
Yeah.
So what's you got your degree and another degree and then another degree. What makes the primates to you so interesting?
Yeah, so like I said, there's, I was hooked from day one once I saw those images and videos, just at the sheer diversity of species that existed that I had no idea until I took that initial course and started learning more about them. So that was obviously very exciting for me, and I, had just this idea that I could travel potentially to these places and see them in the wild. That was very enticing. And then the other piece of it, like I remember in that class, and then I worked for a summer at the Calgary Zoo raising funds for one of their exhibits there. And so there was a gorilla that I kind of met when I was working at the zoo that had been raised by humans because, rejected by its mother. And that gorilla was very interested in the humans that would come by the exhibit. And I just remember looking, you're not supposed to look into the eyes of an ape because it can be kind of a threat. But this particular gorilla was different because he had been raised by humans. She had been raised by humans. And so she, I just remember she looked into my eyes, and that was incredible. Like, just, it's a feeling. I still get chills talking about it, but you just knew in my core that we were related.
Yep.
You can it's just, you see yourself reflected back, and the DNA proves that. We're with chimpanzees, we share 98% of our DNA with them. We've descended from a common ancestor, so that's all very real. But yeah, just having that connection has always been, part of the impetus for why I wanted to study them. And then the other piece of it for me is, what I learned since is that unfortunately many of these primates are under threat in the wild, threatened with extinction. So for instance, in that gorilla, I learned in that introductory course that at the time, there was only 350 individual mountain gorillas left in the wild, individuals.
What?
And so when I looked around that classroom, that was about the same number of students that were sitting there with me. And so that to know that was all that was left in the world, in the wild, was pretty staggering. And so that has been a big driving force for me to study the primates.
Now, is there a comeback for mountain gorillas, or is it staying about the same?
There is. There thankfully, now the number has risen. So since I was an undergrad, so now it's the estimate is about 1,000. And so that's great. And so there's been a lot of, conservation efforts that are happening in the countries where the mountain gorillas are living. And
mountain gorillas, and there's I'm going to diverge or digress or something here. You watch YouTube, and there's these videos of apes, great apes, gorillas, on one side of the glass and a human on the other side, and the human will do something and the ape will copy it or do it one better or show off even more. So what does that tell us? Is that they're pretty close to us in more ways than one?
Yeah, absolutely. There's huge, I'm not an expert in cognition, but there's a huge, you can go down a big rabbit hole if you wanted to learn about,
right,
great ape, especially great ape cognition. There's actually it's a kind of an old movie now, but something that I think still is really interesting. There's a movie it's produced by Nova, I think, called Ape Genius. And I always used to show that movie in my courses when I would teach it, because it was just so fascinating to see how, like you said, like great apes, like chimpanzees will often like copy behavior, but they'll also like figure things out. Like if you give them like a puzzle or like something that's, where there's food as the reward at the end, like they'll easily figure things out. And yeah, there's a ton of research about this, but yeah, I think that's definitely a clue, and something that we should be aware of is how similar they are to us in many ways. Yeah. More ways than we wish sometimes, I think.
There are people who say that we shouldn't have zoos, and there's people who say we should. What's your stance on that question?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think there's a lot of considerations with zoos, and there's a big difference between modern zoos and zoos of the past. Like I write about the London Zoo, for instance, in the book. That it comes up when I am writing about some baboons and some baboon research that has happened, and the way that the primates got to the zoo isn't great, right? Like they went and took them from the wild and transported them to London to put them in that zoo. Yeah. And so that's true of all zoos, and that's how like the animals originally got there. Thankfully, that's not what we do anymore. So that's a good thing. And I think a lot of zoos now, especially if like you want to be careful about what zoos you're visiting, right? There's a big difference between an accredited zoo and what we would call like a roadside zoo, right? Like something could call itself a zoo that actually isn't. So you have to be really careful about that. So do your research going in to see, who owns it, like how are they treating the animals, and then also it's good to try to learn about like what conservation efforts are they doing, because good zoos now will be contributing to what we call in situ conservation, right? So they have the animals that they have, and they're no longer coming out of the wild into the zoo, right? Like they're being bred in zoos, so that's good. And then just what are they doing to contribute to like if they're thinking about the animals that are living in the wild, like are they making contributions, are they working with conservation organizations? So those are the kinds of things I'm looking for when I am going to a zoo.
I think the most impressive one I've been to, and I haven't been to too many, I think Seattle and the San Diego Zoo is very. Is that a good one in your opinion, or?
Yeah, no, I actually went there just last spring, and it was an incredible zoo. I was lucky enough to get a little kind of tour from the primate, the head of the primate exhibits. She took us around, and I saw the gelada baboons for the first time there in the wild, or not in the wild, in the zoo in real life, and they were much bigger than I ever expected, and they have this, if you take a look online for an image, like they have this beautiful like flowing hair, and I just remember seeing the wind was like blowing it a little bit, and it was just incredible. So that was a good zoo for sure.
Yeah, and back to chimpanzees for a moment. I'm one of the generation where we saw the marquee chimps on the Ed Sullivan Show and the Red Skelton Show and stuff like that, and there's these little guys running around wearing diapers and doing all sorts of silly tricks. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or in between, like using the chimps as a show-off vehicle for the trainers?
Yeah, I would categorize that as a bad thing, especially knowing what we know now, both about, especially like great ape intelligence, but monkeys are often used a lot, like capuchin monkeys are often used in the entertainment industry because they are very, very smart, right? Like in the wild, we know that capuchin monkeys will use rocks to crack open nuts, for example. So they can be really easily trained. And like Ross's monkey on Friends was a capuchin monkey, so they often come up. But as you said too, like apes a little bit as well. But the problem is, a lot of those monkeys and apes that you're seeing are young because, they're easier to control. But once they get big enough, those chimpanzees, especially. Like, they're super strong. They're not meant to be living in those conditions. And so it can often go pretty badly, and has gone pretty badly many times. So now I think there's a big shift. I think Disney has stopped using primates and has switched to solely CGI. So technology has really helped with that. And the problem with pets too is because exotic pets are often not legal. They are still kind of taken in ways that they shouldn't be from the wild. So I would say primates as pets, they are definitely cute, but definitely not good for people or for the primates.
Now, are we going to have a Planet of the Apes where they're going to take over, just like in the movies?
I don't know. Maybe. I guess if we have to behave ourselves, and we'll see.
well, like you said, they're so close. What, 98% DNA, pretty much. So, that's pretty close, to say the least. We're talking with Keriann Mcgoogan, Sisters of the Jungle, the trailblazing women who shaped the study of wild primates. So, was there a moment when you were inspired, an aha moment, to write about women studying primates?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I was continuing along in my undergraduate journey, I took a number of different primatology courses, and one of them was the history of primatology. And that's where I read this article by Dr. Linda Fettigan, who's the woman on the cover of this book. And it's called Science and the Successful Female, Why Are There So Many Women Primatologists? So she not only studied primates in the wild, but, she also reflected on this idea that if you think about it, many of the earliest researchers that were traveling to the wild to study primates in their natural habitat were female. And so, we've all heard of Dr. Jane Goodall, who sadly passed away in 2025. Yeah. But there's, dozens of others. So Diane Fossey is also a name that many people know. Brute Galdica studied orangutans, and then I could just keep on going. So she kind of was reflecting on why are there so many women studying wild primates, especially in the 60s and 70s, that were traveling to these far-off places. And this is a unique thing, a unique quality of primatology as a science versus other sciences where you see more often than not it's more men than women in the disciplines. And so she came up with a number of different hypotheses for why. She talked about, for instance, one that she dispelled pretty quickly was this idea of the big brown eye hypothesis, which posited that maybe women were drawn to it because primates are cute and cuddly, which if you actually learn more about the primates, they're not usually that cute and cuddly. You see baboons with their huge canine teeth, for example. Yeah. Chimpanzees, there's more than, many, many stories of chimpanzees, showing aggression between and within their groups. They actually hunt baboons. They hunt colobus monkeys. So they're not exactly cute. No. They're not exactly cuddly, I should say.
Cute and cuddly.
So she dispelled that one, but then she had a few others, it came up 60s and 70s, we're talking around the same time as the second wave of feminism. So maybe it's not a coincidence that, a discipline that women could, travel to these far off places, emerged around that same time when they were also looking for independence and, interested in, breaking down barriers and things. So that was another one. She also talks about the National Geographic effect, which is this idea that some of the earliest women, like Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Brute Galdikas, were splashed on the covers of National Geographic magazines, and so maybe served as kind of role models for other women to enter the discipline. So she had all these different hypotheses, which I thought, as I was reading the article, were incredibly fascinating. So, that kind of stuck with me as I continued along my academic journey. And then when I was studying lemurs in Madagascar for my PhD, I was actually the only woman amongst a team of male, research assistants and researchers on that first journey that I went to study lemurs. And so it was kind of interesting for me as I was experiencing that as the only woman on the team. I kept thinking about, Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey and Linda Fettigan, who were, coming up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, doing their research, and what that experience would have been like. And so that's why I decided to write this book, because I wanted to try to understand why there are so many women drawn to this study of wild primates, but instead of looking at like scientific data like Linda did so well in that article, I wanted to tell the women's stories and see what I could uncover using their stories.
What did you find out about why so many women are drawn to this field? Did you uncover any smoking guns, so to speak?
Well, that was what was interesting, as I was hoping to, but in the end, it was an interesting journey, because each of these women that I write about had, like, you couldn't be more diverse in terms of the stories and how they got to study primates. Like, Jane Goodall had this deep love of animals and nature, and she had a very supportive mother who kind of encouraged her to do things and break down these barriers. Diane Fossey, had these really critical parents. Her mom and stepdad were incredibly cold and distant, but she, ended up going to study the mountain gorillas. Jean Altman is another woman that I write about. She was a trained mathematician. She describes her parents as true New Yorkers, being allergic to the outdoors, and she'd never done any camping in her life besides like a few summers at Girl Scouts. And so, all of the stories were so different, but it was still like easy to see how they got to, study primates if you kind of trace their journeys. Like it was a clear path, but each one was different. So I think what I found was like there's actually no one answer for why women are drawn to study primates. I know that's probably a frustrating conclusion, but that's what I found. And I think maybe the more important question was like, how did they actually shape the discipline? Like, what discoveries did they make, and what did that tell us about the primates and about our understanding of ourselves as well?
And who are or were the Primates?
Yeah, the Primates is a nickname given to the three women that were out there studying the great apes. That's Dr. Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Dr. Brute Galdicas. And so Jane was studying the chimps, Diane was studying the gorillas, and Brute was studying the orangutans, and each of them was sponsored by a famous archaeologist named Louis Leakey. Yep. And so Leakey had been studying our human ancestors for many, many years, and was interested in the great apes because he wanted to understand how the earliest human ancestors behaved, which you couldn't tell from the fossil record, right? Because you can't see what they're doing. So he decided that he needed to send some folks off to the field to study the wild apes. And he also had some interesting views on who would make the best candidates for doing those studies. He, for better or for worse, believed that women made better observers, were more attentive and passionate, and would be better to go and study primates. So that's why he decided to sponsor these three women to go off and study the great apes. So I definitely don't always agree with these kinds of stereotypes, because, speaking for myself, my husband would tell you I'm probably the least observant person you might ever meet. I could be walking down the street and see, someone juggling or on stilts, and I might just like blow right past them. I always kind of joke that's like the writer in me, and maybe I'm like just in my head. But so I had to really learn to observe primates when I was doing that. But whether it's true or not kind of doesn't matter, because that is what drove Leakey to sponsor these women. And I think that did have an influence on the trajectory for the discipline, right? Right. Because he sent them off there.
And what do you want people to take away from the book, which is called Sisters of the Jungle by Keriann Mcgoogan?
Yeah, so I would really like for people to know, I guess, to be inspired to chase their passions, whatever those might be, like read these stories of the women and take it as inspiration. I certainly did, to know about, Jane Goodall, who took a 3-week steamer ship across 14,000 kilometers just to get to Africa, because she was so passionate about this dream to go and see animals in nature and to study chimpanzees. They were facing down incredible barriers, like Jean Altman, who I mentioned, who was, when she was taking her math degree in California, she was one of three women in the whole cohort of students, and all of the male students were given advisors, and she and the other 2 women were told they didn't need them. So these are the kinds of barriers they were, coping with. And so I think I hope that will be inspirational for people, that they can see, how these women, persisted through some pretty immense barriers. So just knowing whatever your passion is, keep chasing it, and I hope that it'll inspire some others to chase their dreams, I guess, so to speak.
And we're talking with Keriann Mcgoogan. Before we go, Keriann, a quick another question. What would you suggest for people who, after listening to this, maybe younger folks, of course, to get into the field? What do you suggest they do? Where's their starting point, if there is one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're interested in studying primates, there's a couple of entry points you can think about. Volunteering, connecting with people who are doing what you're interested in doing, setting up, informational interviews and chatting with them about how they got to their path to primates. Look for field courses. There's field, courses you can take. That's what I did when I was an undergraduate student. I took a field school in Belize, and that was sort of the start to my field research. Just, I guess, shake down all the possible trees you can, and keep at it. I would say you have to be persistent, and you have to be ready to try new things and push yourself, I think.
I guess that's pretty much any field. Same in broadcasting.
Yeah.
You got to start at the bottom,
Exactly.
Volunteer, see where you can work, helping out on events or meeting up with people who are in the field, developing your networks, stuff like that, going from there. So hockey, if you want to be an equipment manager, you start at the bottom and carry on from there. What's next for you? Are you going off on any more adventures?
Yeah, I am. So this spring and summer, I'm taking a leave for my day job, and I'm working on a new book project, which is going to bring me to Africa and Indonesia. I've already been to Madagascar and Costa Rica, so all of that will come into play, and it will be related to primate conservation. So I'll be working hard on that.
Okay, Sisters of the Jungle by Keriann Mcgoogan. Keriann, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. You can find Talking Books and Stuff anywhere you get your podcasts. Over 300 episodes await you.